I never thought my last mission would be the one that changed everything I believed about war, honor, and what it truly means to be a soldier. My name is Captain James Mitchell, call sign Hawk, and I've been flying F-16s for the United States Air Force for 12 years. I've seen combat in 3 different theaters, earned commendations and done things I'm proud of, and some I'm not. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on that cold November morning over the Syrian border. The pre-dawn briefing at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey was routine. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room, his weathered face illuminated by the projection screen showing satellite imagery of our target area. The air conditioning hummed steadily, fighting against the tension building in the room. 6 of us sat in those uncomfortable metal chairs, flight suits crisp, notepads open, coffee growing cold in styrofoam cups. "Gentlemen, this is a time-sensitive target," Hayes began, his voice carrying that particular gravity that meant lives were on the line. "Intel suggests a high-value convoy moving through this valley at 0600 hours, 3 vehicles, possible weapons transfer to insurgent forces. Your mission is reconnaissance and, if confirmed hostile, elimination." I studied the terrain on the screen, rugged mountains, narrow valleys, typical of the region. It was the kind of place where shadows played tricks on your targeting systems, where a shepherd with his flock could look like a military formation if you weren't careful. I'd learned to be careful. 12 years of careful. ROE is standard, Hayes continued, referring to the rules of engagement. Positive identification required before weapons release. "Mitchell, you'll be flight lead. Wilson, you're his wingman." Lieutenant Sarah Wilson, sitting 2 seats to my left, nodded sharply. She was relatively new to combat operations. This was only her 4th mission in theater, but she was sharp, composed, and had scored highest in her class at weapons school. I'd requested her as my wingman specifically, because she didn't let adrenaline override judgment. After the briefing, I walked across the tarmac toward my aircraft as the sun began painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. The November air was crisp, almost cold, a welcome change from the scorching summers this base endured. My ground crew chief, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, was already at the aircraft conducting final checks. "She's ready for you, Captain," Rodriguez said, patting the aircraft's fuselage with the affection of a man who'd been maintaining these birds for 20 years. "Smooth as silk. Bring her back the same way." "Always do, Rodriguez," I replied, beginning my walk-around inspection. It was superstition as much as procedure. I'd done this before every flight since my first solo. I ran my hand along the leading edge of the wing, checked the weapons pylons, examined the landing gear. Everything looked good. 30 minutes later, Wilson and I were airborne, climbing through scattered clouds into the deep blue morning sky. The Mediterranean Sea stretched out below us, impossibly beautiful from 20,000 feet. At this altitude, the world looked peaceful, pristine, untouched by the conflicts that plagued the ground below. "Hawk, this is Sabre 2-1, flight of 2, passing Angels 20, heading 045. Wilson's voice came through my headset, crisp and professional. "Copy 2-1, maintain formation, 30 minutes to target area." The flight across southern Turkey was uneventful. I monitored my instruments, checked in with AWACS, our airborne command and control, and reviewed the mission parameters one more time. Something about this one felt different, though I couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was the fact that this was scheduled to be my last combat mission before rotating back stateside. Maybe it was the lingering unease from a dream I'd had the night before. Or maybe, after 12 years, I was finally developing the 6th sense that veteran pilots talked about, the one that whispered warnings when something wasn't right. We crossed into Syrian airspace right on schedule. The landscape below transformed from the relatively developed regions of southern Turkey to the war-scarred terrain of northern Syria. Even from altitude you could see it. Bombed-out buildings, cratered roads, entire villages reduced to rubble. "Hawk 2-1, contact AWACS reports negative activity in target area. Convoy hasn't reached the valley yet," Wilson informed me. "Copy. We'll set up a combat air patrol and wait." We established our patrol pattern, flying lazy circles at altitude, staying above the range of most ground-based threats, while maintaining a good view of the valley below. The minutes ticked by slowly. This was often the hardest part of combat operations. The waiting, the anticipation. Your mind running through scenarios while you tried to stay alert, but not anxious. Then, at exactly 0603, Wilson's voice crackled through. "Hawk, I've got movement. 3 vehicles entering the valley from the north, just like Intel said." I immediately focused my attention on the targeting pod display, bringing up the high-resolution camera feed. Sure enough, 3 vehicles, looked like civilian trucks, maybe Toyotas or similar, were making their way through the narrow valley road. AWACS Hawk, we have visual on 3 vehicles matching description. Request clearance to descend for positive identification. Hawk, AWACS, cleared to descend. Maintain standoff distance until PID is complete. Wilson and I descended to 15,000 feet, still well above effective range of shoulder-fired missiles, but close enough for our sensors to get detailed imagery. I zoomed in on the convoy, studying every detail through my targeting pod. That's when I saw them. My blood ran cold as the high-resolution image became crystal clear on my display. The 3 vehicles weren't military transports. They weren't even the hardened trucks typically used by insurgent forces. They were civilian vehicles, old battered pickup trucks with faded paint and mismatched panels. And in the beds of those trucks, I could see them clearly. Children. Wilson, are you seeing this? My voice was tight, controlled, but inside I felt like someone had just punched me in the stomach. Affirmative, Hawk. I count at least 15 children, maybe more. I focused the camera, cycling through different imaging modes, infrared, optical zoom, enhanced contrast. Every mode confirmed what I already knew in my gut. These weren't military-age males, these weren't weapons, these were kids, ranging from what looked like 6 or 7 years old to maybe their early teens. They were huddled together in the truck beds, some wrapped in blankets against the cold morning air. AWACS Hawk, we have a problem. Target vehicles appear to be carrying civilian children. Repeat, civilian children. Request clarification on identification. There was a pause. In combat operations, even a 5-second pause feels like an eternity. My aircraft continued its patrol pattern on autopilot, while my mind raced through possibilities. Had Intel gotten it wrong? Was this an elaborate screening tactic, using children to shield weapons? But my cameras weren't showing any weapons, just children, and what appeared to be adults, probably teachers or caretakers in the cab of each truck. Hawk, AWACS, stand by. Checking with higher. I continued observing the convoy. The trucks were moving slowly, carefully navigating the rough road. One of the children in the lead truck was pointing at something in the distance. Maybe a bird, maybe just the mountains. Another child appeared to be sleeping, head resting on a companion's shoulder. These were innocent people. Every fiber of my being, every hour of training, every regulation I'd ever studied told me these were non-combatants. Hawk, AWACS, higher confirms intelligence indicates this convoy is a cover for weapons movement. Weapons may be concealed within or beneath civilian presence. You are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. My hands tightened on the controls. I felt Wilson's presence on my wing, could almost sense her shock mirroring my own. AWACS Hawk. Negative visual confirmation of any weapons. Repeat, no weapons visible. Request reconfirmation of clearance. Hawk, AWACS. Intel is solid. This is the convoy. You have weapons release authority. I cycled through my imaging modes again, desperately looking for anything that would justify what they were asking me to do. My targeting system was painting the lead vehicle, ready to release. One press of a button and 2,000-pound guided bombs would end this, would end them. But I couldn't see any weapons. I couldn't see any threat. I could only see children. Captain Mitchell, Colonel Hayes' voice suddenly cut through on the command frequency. Hawk, this is Warhammer 6. You have your orders. That convoy cannot be allowed to proceed. Intel is time-sensitive and reliable. Execute your mission. I had 15 seconds to decide. 15 seconds to choose between 12 years of military service, my oath, my orders, and what my eyes were telling me. 15 seconds to decide whether to trust a faceless intelligence officer I'd never met, or to trust the high-definition camera system I'd relied on for over 1,000 flight hours. Warhammer 6, Hawk. I cannot confirm hostile intent. I cannot confirm presence of weapons. I have clear visual of multiple children. I am not engaging this target. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of that decision settling over me like a physical force. I had just refused a direct order in combat. I had just potentially ended my military career, but I had also just refused to kill children based on intelligence I couldn't verify with my own eyes. Hawk, this is Warhammer 6. You are ordered to engage that convoy. That is a direct order. Warhammer 6, I understand the order. I'm refusing to comply. If you want these vehicles engaged, you'll need to send someone else. Mitchell, you understand the consequences of refusing a lawful order in combat. Yes, sir, I do. But I also understand the consequences of killing children. And I'm looking at children, sir. Not weapons. Children. I pulled my aircraft into a climbing turn, moving away from the attack profile. Wilson followed without hesitation. The convoy below continued its slow progress through the valley, unaware of how close they'd just come to annihilation, unaware that somewhere in the sky above them, a pilot had just thrown away his career to let them live. As we climbed back to altitude, I watched those 3 trucks growing smaller on my display. I expected to feel regret, uncertainty, maybe even fear about what would happen when I landed. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years of combat operations, absolute certainty that I'd made the right choice. Hawk, 2-1, Wilson's voice came through, quiet but firm. I support your call. Those were civilians. Thanks, 2-1. Prepare for a rough landing back at base. The flight back to Incirlik was the longest 90 minutes of my life. My radio remained silent except for routine air traffic control instructions. No orders to divert to another target. No emergency recall. Just silence, which somehow felt more ominous than anger would have been. I ran through the scenarios in my mind. Court-martial seemed likely. Dishonorable discharge was possible. At minimum, I'd be relieved of command. My career over. My retirement benefits potentially stripped. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw those children in the truck beds, and I knew I'd make the same choice again. Wilson flew tight formation off my wing, a silent show of solidarity. She'd witnessed everything, and her testimony would be crucial, but I wouldn't let her go down with me. This was my decision, my responsibility. As we approached Incirlik, I could see emergency vehicles lining the taxiway, a clear signal that this was being treated as a serious incident. I brought my F-16 in for landing, the touchdown smooth despite the turmoil in my mind. Rodriguez was waiting at our parking spot, his usual smile replaced by a grim expression. Colonel wants to see you immediately, sir. Don't even complete your post-flight. I nodded, removed my helmet and headed toward the operations building. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking toward a firing squad. Inside, the corridor to Hayes's office seemed to stretch on forever. Other pilots and airmen stopped to watch me pass, their expressions unreadable. I knocked on Colonel Hayes's door. Enter. Hayes sat behind his desk, his face carved from stone. Standing beside him were 2 officers I didn't recognize, probably from Judge Advocate General's office. This was moving fast. Captain Mitchell, do you understand the gravity of refusing a direct order in combat? Hayes began without preamble. Yes, sir, I do. Do you stand by your decision? I met his eyes steadily. Yes, sir. I could not verify hostile intent. I had clear visual confirmation of multiple children. I could not in good conscience engage that target. Hayes opened a folder on his desk. Your targeting pod recorded everything. JAG has already reviewed it. The question now is whether your assessment was correct or whether you let a legitimate target escape. Sir, with respect, I know what I saw. Captain, one of the JAG officers interrupted. You'll have opportunity to present your case, but right now you're confined to quarters pending investigation. Your flight status is suspended. You're not to discuss this incident with anyone except your appointed counsel. I felt my military career crumbling in real time. Yes, sir. I spent the next 3 days in my quarters, essentially under house arrest. Wilson managed to slip me a note saying she'd been questioned extensively but had told them exactly what happened, that the targeting pod clearly showed civilians, that my decision appeared sound based on visual evidence. But I knew the military justice system. Disobeying orders in combat was one of the most serious offenses possible. On the 4th morning, Rodriguez appeared at my door, his face split by an enormous grin. Captain, you need to see this. Turn on CNN, now. I flipped on the small television in my quarters, confused by his enthusiasm. The screen showed a press conference and my heart nearly stopped when I recognized the location. It was Damascus, the Syrian capital. A Syrian military officer stood at a podium, speaking in Arabic with English subtitles appearing at the bottom of the screen. Behind him, projected on a large screen, was crystal clear video footage, and it was footage of my aircraft. 4 days ago, the officer was saying, an American fighter jet tracked a convoy of civilian vehicles through our northern territory. This convoy was carrying 23 children and 6 teachers from a school in Raqqa, being evacuated to a safer location due to increased fighting in their area. The footage switched to ground-level video, obviously shot by someone in one of the trucks. You could clearly see my F-16 and Wilson's aircraft circling overhead, close enough that the ground cameras had captured clear images. According to our radar tracking and this footage, the Syrian officer continued, the American aircraft maintained what we assessed to be a weapons release position for nearly 10 minutes. The pilot had every opportunity to attack. We detected weapons lock multiple times, but he did not fire. The scene shifted to show the children from that convoy, now safe in what appeared to be a school in another city. They were smiling, playing, alive. Teachers stood with them, some with tears in their eyes. We obtained this footage from the convoy survivors and reviewed it extensively, the officer said. We have concluded that the American pilot deliberately chose not to attack despite having been ordered to do so. We intercepted American military communications that confirmed this. My hands were shaking as I watched. They'd been monitoring our communications. They knew everything. While our nations are not at peace, the Syrian officer concluded, and while we condemn much of American military action in our region, we must acknowledge an act of humanity when we see it. This American pilot, whoever he is, refused to murder children. He chose honor over orders. In this single act, he showed more humanity than many in this conflict have shown. We wanted the world to know that there are still individuals on all sides who remember that we are fighting over principles, not over the right to kill innocents. The press conference changed everything overnight. Within hours, my confinement was lifted, though the investigation continued. The story went viral. American pilot refuses to fire on children became headline news across every major outlet. My name remained officially undisclosed, but everyone on base knew it was me. The reaction was split down the middle. Half the military establishment viewed me as a hero who'd upheld the highest principles of warfare. The other half saw me as insubordinate, someone who'd set a dangerous precedent by refusing orders. Talk shows debated the ethics. Veterans groups issued statements both supporting and condemning my actions. Colonel Hayes called me back to his office a week after the Syrian press conference. This time his expression was different. Not angry, but thoughtful, maybe even conflicted. "Mitchell, sit down." He gestured to a chair. "This has become complicated." "Yes, sir." "The investigation cleared you." JAG determined that given the visual evidence and your reasonable assessment that the intelligence was faulty, your decision to abort fell within acceptable parameters of judgment in combat. You're not being charged with insubordination. Relief flooded through me, but Hayes held up his hand. "However, you're done with combat operations. Higher command doesn't trust that you'll follow orders in future situations. You're being reassigned to a training position at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. You'll be instructing new pilots in weapons employment and ROE. It was better than a court-martial, better than discharge, but it still meant my operational career was over. No more missions, no more combat flying. At 42 years old, I'd been effectively grounded from what I loved most." "I understand, sir." Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Off the record, Mitchell, I would have made the same call. I've seen the full footage. Those were clearly civilians. Intel was either wrong or deliberately falsified. We're still investigating that. But officially, I can't say that. Officially, you created a problem by establishing that pilots can override command based on their judgment. And unofficially, sir? Unofficially? You saved 23 children's lives. You upheld the honor of the uniform. And you reminded everyone that we're supposed to be the good guys." He stood and extended his hand. "It was an honor serving with you, Captain. 3 months later, I found myself at Nellis Air Force Base, settling into my new role as an instructor. The desert heat of Nevada was a far cry from the combat zones I'd known, but the work was meaningful. Every day, I taught young pilots about the technical aspects of warfare, but more importantly, I taught them about judgment, about the weight of decisions, about the responsibility that comes with having the power to take lives. Lieutenant Wilson, who'd been my wingman that day, was transferred to Nellis as well. They made her an instructor too, and we often taught classes together. She never once regretted supporting my decision. One afternoon, 6 months after the incident, I was called to the base commander's office. I walked in to find not just my commander, but 2 men in civilian clothes and a woman I recognized from the State Department. "Captain Mitchell, please sit," the commander said. "These gentlemen are from the Defense Intelligence Agency." My guard immediately went up. This couldn't be good. One of the DIA officers opened a folder. "Captain, we've completed our investigation into the intelligence that led to your mission that day. We wanted to update you personally." He slid several documents across the desk. The intelligence was falsified. Someone in the chain deliberately fabricated reports suggesting that convoy was carrying weapons. We're still investigating who and why, but we wanted you to know. You were right. There were never any weapons. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a school evacuation. I felt vindicated and horrified at the same time. Someone had tried to trick me into killing children. Someone had deliberately lied to make that convoy a target. There's more, the State Department representative said. The Syrian government has reached out through back channels. They want to arrange a meeting, completely off the record, of course. Some of the families from that convoy want to meet you, to thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now. But Captain, what you did that day had ripple effects beyond what you realize. We've had 3 separate insurgent groups reach out with intelligence tips because, in their words, the American pilot who wouldn't kill children deserves to know where the real targets are. Your actions opened doors that years of diplomacy couldn't open. The meeting with the families happened 2 months later, in a neutral country, facilitated by international mediators. I met teachers who told me about the children's nightmares after seeing fighter jets overhead. I met parents who cried while shaking my hand. I met some of the children themselves, now safe in new schools, who drew pictures of airplanes for me, not as weapons of war but as symbols of the second chance they'd been given. One little girl, maybe 8 years old, spoke to me through a translator. My teacher said you could have hurt us, but you didn't. She said that means not all soldiers are scary. Does that mean the war will end soon? I knelt down to her level, my throat tight with emotion. I hope so, sweetheart, I really hope so. Now, I stand in front of a classroom of 20 young pilots at Nellis Air Force Base. They're eager, skilled, ready to prove themselves in combat. But before I teach them about weapons systems or target acquisition, I tell them a story. I tell them about a November morning over Syria, about 3 trucks carrying children, about the hardest decision I ever made. Flying these aircraft gives you incredible power, I tell them, but power without judgment, without humanity, without the courage to question orders when your eyes tell you something's wrong. That's not strength. That's just following commands blindly, and we're better than that. I pull up the footage, my own targeting pod recording from that day, and show them the children in those trucks. Some of you will face moments like this, moments where you have to choose between orders and conscience, between intelligence reports and what you can see with your own eyes. I can't tell you what choice to make, but I can tell you this. You have to be able to live with whatever choice you make. And 12 years from now, 20 years from now, when you close your eyes at night, you need to be at peace with the person you see in the mirror. One young lieutenant raises his hand. Sir, do you regret your decision? Knowing it ended your combat career? I think about that question for a moment, really consider it. I think about the missions I won't fly, the promotions I won't receive, the operational career that ended that morning. Then I think about 23 children who are alive today, going to school, playing with friends, growing up. Not for a single second, Lieutenant. Not for a single second. The truth is, that morning over Syria didn't end my career. It completed it. Everything I'd done in 12 years of military service, every mission flown, every hour logged, had prepared me for that one moment of decision. And in that moment, I chose to be not just a good pilot, but a good human being. Sometimes the hardest part of being a warrior isn't knowing when to fight. It's knowing when not to. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the targets you destroy, but in the lives you refuse to take. I still fly sometimes. Training flights, check rides, proficiency tests, and every time I pull back on that stick and feel the aircraft lift into the sky, I remember those 3 trucks in a Syrian valley. I remember the children huddled in the back, wrapped in blankets against the cold morning air, and I'm grateful that when it mattered most, when everything was on the line, I made the choice I can live with. That's what honor really means. Not blind obedience, not unquestioning compliance, but the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything, especially when it costs you everything. The young pilots in my classroom will face their own moments of truth someday. Some in combat zones far from home, some in decisions that will test everything they believe about duty and honor. I can't make those choices for them, but I can show them that it's possible to be both a soldier and a human being, that orders and conscience don't have to be enemies, that sometimes the most courageous thing a warrior can do is refuse to pull the trigger, and I can live with that legacy. In fact, I'm proud of it.